Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to give a few minutes to let everyone sort of trickle in here. Since we're just at 9 o'clock right now, welcome in. Everyone who's joining us right now, nice to meet you. I'm Lindsay from Outsite. I am head of community and events at Outsite, and I'm calling in from Palm Springs, California today. It's beautiful outside. So in the chat box, I'll just have everyone, you can drop where you're calling in from and maybe what you do for work in the chat box. Make sure you have it set to everyone, not just hosts and panelists, so that everyone can see what you put. Again, I'm Lindsay. I'm head of community and events for Outsite. And I'm here with Jacob, who I'll let introduce himself in just a few moments, because we're going to get started pretty quickly here. There's a lot of really good information in this presentation, and I want to make sure we have plenty of time. But while we're waiting for everyone to arrive, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Let everyone know where you're calling in from and maybe what you do for work, or if there's anything in particular that you're hoping to learn from this session. Again, my name is Lindsay. I am head of community and events for Outsite. We are a company that offers co-living, co-working spaces, community and events just like this one for digital nomads, remote workers, creatives. And we've got some hellos in the chat. Hi, Emily from San Francisco, a climate policy nonprofit. That's really interesting. I'd like to chat later about that. If anyone else wants to introduce themselves, go ahead and drop it right in the chat box. Let us know where you're calling in from, and we'll get started in just a few minutes, because like I said, this presentation has a lot of good information, and I want to leave plenty of time for questions at the end. Hi, Elena from Toronto. Nice to have you here with us. All right, one last introduction, and I'm going to turn it over really quickly so that we can get going. I'm Lindsay from Outsite. I'm calling in from Palm Springs, California. The weather is beautiful here. I hope you're having good weather wherever you are. Oh, Bellingham, Washington in the chat. Nice to have you here. Fort Lauderdale, recruiting and financial services. Awesome. I'm so glad that everyone could join. We're going to talk about how to maintain productivity with a nomadic lifestyle. So whether you're already a digital nomad or you want to become one, this is going to be really useful information. I'm super excited. So I'm going to hand it over to Jacob, who will introduce himself and get started right away. One quick housekeeping note before I do that, though. The chat box is open. The Q&A box is open. We're going to leave some time at the end for questions, so feel free to put any questions that you think of while you're listening in the chat box or the Q&A, and we'll try to leave some time at the end to get those questions answered. So I'm going to turn it over to Jacob now, and I hope everyone enjoys.
So nice to meet you all. So today, indeed, we're going to talk about productivity and how that interacts with creativity. Now, of course, although we are talking about this in a sort of nomadic context, life is volatile. So these principles can apply to a lot of different lifestyles. I like to really start from the foundations of science. So what this is really about is working in alignment with our physiological and our psychological realities at the end of the day. And what we're going to do is I'll do a bit of an intro, talk about some of the principles at play here, we'll have some conclusions, and then we'll have a bit of time for discussion and takeaways. Now, of course, after that, we all go back out in the world, and we ideally will be working more effectively and living better, because those things go together. And so note, as Lindsay said, this presentation does contain a lot of information. I am going to go fast. But the point of the presentation is to make it a reference doc, so going forward, you can iterate your own strategy and leverage this into better wellness, better productivity, and more creativity going forward. So who am I? Well, I'm Jacob, of course. I've lived across 6 different countries and traveled throughout more than 50 while I was building different businesses, running teams and companies, and of course, at the same time, balancing my personal life and relationships. I've worked mostly in energy and in technology commercialization, a lot of different roles, running companies, building companies and teams, advisor as a coach. And for a long time, I struggled with balance and burnout. I find deep meaning in work, and that can be hard because I like to spend a lot of time doing it. But sometimes to work effectively, we actually need to take some steps back and rest. Part of that struggle was due to the fact that I grew up on a ranch with a 24/7 work ethic, and I had to transcend that sort of work ethic related to the physical world into one that was more applicable to knowledge work and then to leadership. And these are quite different themes. And so what I did here, based on my learnings, is I built some things to help others with these same struggles. So I do one-on-one coaching. I've got a revolutionary character course, which I'll talk about a little bit later. and community. And I also do leadership training for startups, accelerators, and some other things. And of course, I actually still have a real job running a couple business units for a Swiss tech company as well. And so my mission in general is to help others do hard things, lead themselves, which is hard, of course, and bring new things to the world, whether that be creative projects, companies, other endeavors. And so just one thing for the rules of the game, I didn't realize we weren't going to have much of a discussion here. It's going to be mostly based on the chat and at the end, but these rules still hold up. At the end of the day, we want to have an effective discussion. We don't want to just agree needlessly on things. We want to, challenge each other's ideas in the end and learn from that dynamic and from the diversity in our group. So one thing that I will ask, and I'll just put these questions up if you want to pop some things in the chat real quick. What is productivity for you? What is creativity? Why do we want them? And what is our ultimate objective? So I'll leave about 30 seconds, a minute for people to drop some things in the chat if there's any perspectives out there. Try and keep it succinct, please. Any perspectives? Creativity's flow. Yes, that's a good one, right? We get creativity from flow. We're effective when we're in flow. Creativity flow tends to be very focused, though, right? It tends to be much more about execution. Yes, we want to do more meaningful work. Indeed. Anything else? Any perspectives out there? Okay, just in the interest of time, I'm going to move ahead. And so what my sort of definition, let's see, we've got another one here. The ultimate goal for productivity for me is to work on more interesting products. I think that's a great one. So for me, like what I think it is leveraging the realities of our psychology and our physiology to work, collaborate, and live with maximum energy, motivation, and effectiveness towards our goals. That is kind of the working model that I work with. So of course, I pose the question to you, do we agree? Please, of course, put any comments you have in the chat there, and let's get started. So when we confront our days and we confront our lives, there's just a lot of different stuff that we need to do. Depending on what our jobs look like, what our lives look like. Do we have partners? Do we have children? But, in the jobs ourselves, we have to do things like answering emails and administrative tasks. We have to, answer chats in the phone. We have to prioritize different things. Maybe we have to train other people. We have to write. These are very, very different tasks. So the question here is, how do we figure out how to channel energy and focus to so many disparate tasks? And so what I think is the most instructive is to start with an example. So how did I make this presentation? So I thought about the principles of productivity. I outlined the presentation. I made the presentation. I gave the presentation. Actually, I've given similar things a few times in the past. So in the first part, I thought about what to do. And in the second part, I actually did, or I executed. Of course, after I did the first one, I brainstormed some improvements. Again, thinking about what I should do, and sort of get this virtuous loop of continuous improvement to make it better and better over time with subsequent iterations. So at the end of the day, what we can break tasks up into is thoughtful reflection, which leverages divergent thinking, and we can break it into a second category, which is focused execution, which is convergent thinking. And so what is divergent thinking? Divergent thinking is when we are thinking about ideas, using our imagination and creativity, and generating original ideas and new possibilities beyond, let's say, our current state of knowledge. When it comes to convergent thinking, sorry about that. When it comes to convergent thinking, this is much more focused. So here we are executing, we're using logic, and generally we're trying to find concrete and familiar solutions to problems, but we're also implementing the results of our creativity or of our divergent thinking. So if we want to enhance divergent thinking, there's one way we can do it quite easy. You can sit down for about 5 minutes, do a meditation, sitting with your eyes closed, and just let the thoughts flow, no controlling, observing them, see where your thoughts and where your mind go. If we want to prime ourselves for convergent thinking before we do work, before we sit down to really focus, then you can use focus attention monitoring again for about 5 minutes. So sit with your eyes closed or open, and then focus on a specific object, sound, or point. If we want to enhance our divergent thinking, we should actually not use caffeine, but rather go for a walk, change up your environment, sort of engage in something that is a bit more without an objective exploration to cultivate that thinking. And of course, if we want to actually execute and leverage our convergent thinking, then caffeine can help us. And so the idea is I'm going to break this sort of the principles of effective work and balancing creativity with the volatility of life and a nomad lifestyle into 5 or 6 different principles. The first one is practice functional compartmentalization. So the idea is when you plan out your day, when you're thinking about what you're doing, don't mix tasks. You want to either be focused on execution or you want to be reflecting, and you don't want to mix these 2 tasks. The idea is when you're in your focused execution mode, you're fully on, you're using your sympathetic nervous system largely, your thought, your vision is convergent, it's goal-oriented, and your capacity, the capacity you've built up of energy is being used. When you're engaging in thoughtful reflection, you are renewing yourself, you're more on the parasympathetic side of the nervous system, your thoughts and vision is divergent and exploratory, and you are actually also recharging at the same time. And the idea is, if we want to be most effective, then we need to minimize context switching between these 2 modes. The second principle is to work in cycles. So here we kind of acknowledge our biological rhythms and work with them over our days, months, and years, because these affect energy. The way that we've basically been told to work is that we wake up, we go all day long, and we sleep. And so this is actually what something like a machine does, like a pump, right? So you turn the machine on, you pump water all day, you turn it off, stops pumping water. And this is largely a sort of mindset that we've inherited from the Industrial Revolution, when the question was, how do we actually maximize the output of machines? And I would argue myself that we're not machines. So what's the alternative? What I would say is a better question is, how do we optimize our outputs over time according to the realities of human physiology and psychology and the type of work which needs to be done? Now, we all share very similar psychology and physiology, but the type of work that we need to do, that's where it varies. And so here, the way that we actually work is much more in cycles, even throughout the day. And this maps onto what is known as our alternating rhythms. And so here, this is sort of a basic abstraction of what this could look like over the course of a day. The idea being we work for about 90 minutes and then we rest for about 20 minutes. And so while we are working, we are burning oxygen, we're burning glucose, energy, neurotransmitters, and eventually we're accumulating stress, right? So metabolic waste, cellular debris, random data in our brains, and we're putting a load on our nervous system. And we can start to recognize when we've pushed past the optimum, when we need a few minutes to recover, when we start having cravings for sugar, caffeine, and carbs to push through. And the alternative to doing those things, which I think is more effective, and the science backs this up, is if we are able to effectively rest, even if it's just for 5-10 minutes in between those cycles. So then the question is, principle number 3, what do we need to do to leverage this rest and to rest effectively and to maximize our performance? We actually need to learn how to rest. And so first, some bad stories here. What happens when we don't rest? So, a lot of bad health outcomes, a lot of bad outcomes in terms of sickness, metabolism, a lot of other things. And the point of this whole list is bad stuff happens over time that hinders us from reaching our objectives if we are not resting effectively. These things are bad for individual health and well-being, and they're also bad for our output. So wellness here and our output or productivity are aligned. And so the takeaway here is that resting appropriately actually increases productivity, energy, willpower, and motivation to get things done. And so at the end of the day here, we can keep one thing in mind. So effective recovery is known as active recovery, and that's also where we can leverage divergent thinking. And a bit more about that later. So the aspiration in general is to try and work on cycles of about 90 minutes. If you have trouble, you can start between 30 and 60 minutes and try not to go over 120 minutes, because that maps onto our normal rhythm. In between, when you feel that energy waning, you rest for 5 to 20 minutes and understand that as we go into these focus blocks and out of them, ramping up and ramping down the focus will take time. So you actually have to take a rest a little bit before your focus really goes down. Otherwise, frankly, that is too late. You can use a timer to develop an awareness of the ebb and flow of your energy with time, experimenting with 30-minute blocks, 45-minute blocks, 60-minute blocks, until you start to figure out what really works for you. And here it's key to understand the purpose of the break. The purpose of the break is to replenish energy and motivation and sort of heal and regenerate energy so that you can burn it hard again. And of course, when you're taking that time to step back, even if it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, you also are leveraging divergent thinking to look back, even if you don't intentionally do that cognitively, to see, okay, what was I doing right? What was I doing wrong? And how can I actually, do things better going into my next cognitive block? You can course correct your focus blocks over time like that. General rule, but this varies, that most people can get 2 focus blocks in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. You have to experiment a bit to see what the best times are for you. I'm a little bit crazy in that my best time is working between 5 and 9 o'clock in the morning. So that's just my flow, and I figured that out with a lot of experimentation, and then I do another 1 or 2 in the afternoon. If you get used to it, you can push longer, maybe up to a maximum of about 120 minutes, but this can affect your energy and motivation in the following days if you burn it too hard. Now, sometimes we have a deadline, we have to do this, or we're reaching for something heroically, but you always have to ask yourself, is it really worth it in this specific context to burn myself to the ground, to take away that energy, motivation, and creativity in the longer term just to get this thing done? In some cases, it can very well be the case. So at the end of the day, what does effective active recovery look like? So this active means we're not just sitting there, we're actively engaging in recovery and in rest. And so I've got a ton of ideas. These can be things like yoga. These can be things like calling a friend or chatting with a friend or a coworker, making a list of things that you're grateful for. And one big thing is to also try to put your body in a contrasting position. So if you're sitting down at the desk, get up, walk around, do some stretching, for instance. And there's a ton more ideas here. So you can get a drink of water, a cup of tea, coffee, something like this. Grab a healthy snack. You can go outside and take a walk, looking around, sort of exploring, again, leveraging that divergent thinking to of course correct and think about ways to improve what you're doing, but of course to get your rest at the same time. And I've got a ton more ideas here. Again, all of this is for reference later, just to give you plenty of ideas to rest and to not have an excuse not to do so. These are a couple more complicated ones. These ones here are all designed to be something that takes between a few minutes and 20 minutes. And the idea is these are specific things you can put in between those other blocks. I do this myself. I do 1 block in the morning and then I go for a workout. I do another block and then I do some stretching. I have lunch. I do another focus block. I do some stretching again, or I do a walk. So I actually use all of these things myself. And these are really easy things to put in between those focus blocks. And sometimes just set and forget it by watching some of these videos or following the directions quite easily. These are one last chunk of other active recovery protocols. Maybe some of these things don't fit necessarily within your day, but they can fit at the end of your day. And so again, these are just some ideas. And of course, exercise is a very strong one. So getting your heart rate up every day and sleeping 8 hours. These are 2 very essential things for well-being and our productivity. So I've went quite fast through all of that. And now before we go further and look at some of the other principles, then I'll combine the first 3 to give you a more practical idea of how you can implement this yourself. So again, we talked about only investing our time solely with focused execution or convergent thinking, or on the other hand, only engaging in thoughtful reflection or divergent thinking. And the idea is to sort of work in cycles, right? So we have this cycle where we're doing our focused execution, burning energy, putting stress on ourselves, and then we have a recovery mode afterwards to bring it back to ourselves back to baseline. And again, here the point of rest is that it enables recharging, but it also helps us see the forest for the trees, as I've kind of mentioned. So what worked, what didn't work in my focus block, or in my life in general, my career in general, gives us more energy to do. And it also, beyond just recharging our energy, it makes us step back and make sure that we're allocating that energy properly. And again, what happens here as we do this in cycles is something that is known as super compensation. We actually end up growing, expanding our capacity to be productive and creative over time, as long as we don't burn it too hard. And the thing that we want to avoid is, all right, okay, sorry. So yes, finishing up this piece. And the idea is just to go back and forth between these 2 modes. Again, that divergent and that convergent thinking in cycles. And if we do that effectively, what happens is we can work ferociously, rest, induce growth, and be more effective and have higher wellness. Whereas if we are just in this gray zone where we're not really, focused and working on something, but not really relaxing and not really engaging in creative efforts and divergent thinking. They were kind of in this halfway suboptimal place. We're dysregulated. We're sort of halfway working, halfway not. Maybe we're checking some emails and then and then we're sort of writing some things down, playing with Excel a bit, not super engaged in any one of those tasks and just drifting from one thing to the other. And here, the important part is that over time, over the long arc, we are degrading our own capacities to execute. And if we do this, not acknowledging our human physiology and psychology, then eventually we are degrading our own capacity to work and to thrive over time. So principle number 4, moving on, is design and iterate your agenda. And the way that I like to say this is that at the end of the day, your agenda is your current theory about how to best deploy your limited energy, focus, motivation, and willpower towards the things that you believe in, whatever they might be. And so the idea here is to start with a very simple version of your agenda if you don't work from an agenda rigorously, and use the principles that we've discussed so far. So functional compartmentalization, where we are either focusing on execution or thoughtful reflection, working in 30 to 90-minute cycles with the breaks in between. And here, another point is we sometimes it's easier in our lives if we rigorously structure our weaknesses, right? So I'm somebody who tends to work a bit too hard. Last night I actually stayed working till 9 or 10, and then I had a hard time getting to sleep. And so what I need to do, because my strength is that focused execution, is I need to make sure that I get that active recovery. As long as I'm focusing on the active recovery, then a lot of the other just seems to take care of itself in my life. Other people I've coached through this have had similar experiences, but sometimes they're on the other end. They have a lot more stronger strength than I do, for instance, in that divergent thinking piece. And then what they end up doing is structuring those flow blocks to actually turn that creativity into something that they're bringing to the world. Again, principle number 4 or under this one is rest effectively with active recovery, and engage in long-run stress management, which means caring for your basic needs. And we'll talk about this in a second. At the end of the day, the components of your agenda are going to be these chunks of focused execution, thoughtful reflection, active recovery, inbox time, for instance, not just randomly checking our emails because we want to give ourselves the idea that we're doing something, but setting time aside to respond to those emails, respond to those chats in a more focused way. Some people, if you're managing teams specifically or working with other people, you can channel those requests that come in at a lot of different times, people stopping by your desk or on the chats, by putting office hours in your calendars and setting expectations that people can come by or call you ideally during those times, unless, of course, it's an emergency. And of course, there's other components, but these are the main ones. And then the other point here to remember is that playing with our phone is something we can do. We can schedule this. It's right. Our phones are great tools, but we shouldn't confuse ourselves that looking through Twitter or Instagram is actually active recovery. It's not. It's actually degenerate. It's still causing us to lose energy. And the other more important thing is it's so addictive with what it does to our dopamine that it can actually make it harder for us to get back to work on other things that maybe don't give us quite as much of a rush as scrolling through Instagram and finding awesome and cute cat videos or whatever you might do there. And so this is sort of the agenda that I lay out here is sort of the way that I work, but of course I'm not proclaiming my way is the best way. It's just the way that I leverage these principles into my own days, weeks, and months. And so what I basically do as a general principle is in the beginning of the week, I'm about 90% focused on the execution, right? So the convergent thinking. At the end of the week, Friday and the weekend, that is weighted much more heavily towards thoughtful reflection. And so then in the mornings, in general, I'll have some focus blocks, more in the beginning of the week, less in the end of the week. Then I always exercise, amongst those focus blocks. And of course, on Friday, I'm very, very rarely actually doing focus blocks. I try to get most of my work done in the morning and early in the week, work as an execution. And then after that, what I do is I move forward from this focused execution bias towards a lunch break, which for me pretty much always looks the same. I have lunch, I mess with my phone a little bit because I do like those cat videos. And then I do a non-sleep deep rest protocol, which is a yoga nidra, something that I find really recharges me going forward after the intensity of the morning. especially when I get up at a ridiculous hour. And so then in the afternoon, I will still do 1 or 2 focus blocks, especially earlier in the week. Also there, as when I put my inbox time, that's when I tend to go through my emails. I try to put my meetings in the afternoon as well, because I want to use my very convergent focus in the morning to just do the things that I have to execute on, writing emails, doing analysis in Excel, whatever that might be, depending on the day. And then I get a bit of reflection built in to each afternoon. And so in the evening, of course, that's much more on the care for basic needs, which we're going to talk about in a second, and active recovery. I personally, at the end of my workday, I'll go to the sauna every day. That's one way that I sort of cut that transition and move into a much more divergent, sort of relaxed state as I move towards sleep and spending time with my friends. So again, early in the week, I'm much more focused on execution. Later in the week, as my energy degrades, I'm using a lot of rest to recover that energy, but also to leverage that into actual creativity. In the mornings, I'm more focused towards execution, and I do focus much more towards reflection in the afternoon and the evening. But of course, this is just the way that I leverage it. You might have different ways of leveraging these principles. So to the point here, I aspire to this schedule, but I can't always adhere to it. I iterate every Friday. So I spend some time every Friday planning my week ahead, defining what I'm going to work on in the focus blocks that I have in my agenda. And I also see what worked and what didn't work. And, when you get sick, when different things happen, when there's, a very important priority that suddenly wipes your day away, of course, we have to be flexible. But I'm always aspiring to have the intention to do things like this, because for me, it's worked very well in terms of just increasing my wellness, creativity, focus. I think it's a myth that we can't work hard and not feel well. And so another sort of rhetorical question, what is stress and is it bad? So when I ask this question, most people seem to have the default assumption that stress is bad, but stress is actually a lot simpler than that. So stress is a generic system the body uses to turn on what it needs, turn off what it doesn't, and stimulate the body or mouth to action. So depending on the context, stress can be good or stress can be bad, but it's something that sets us in motion. And it's not bad with optimum dosing. And so here, we're going to talk a little bit more broadly about long-run stress management. So the idea is, if we want to maintain optimal levels of arousal and managing our stress during focus blocks, if we're too aroused or too energetic, that what can happen is that our performance can be impaired because of strong anxiety at that far end of the bell curve. And if we are not aroused enough or not stimulated enough, then we have little attention and energy to invest. And these are 2 different ways to illustrate that there. And what we want to do is sort of maintain this optimum window of tolerance or optimum level of arousal or of energy so that we can effectively execute. So this is another sort of rhetorical question for you to think about that would help you then structure an agenda and leverage this principle in your specific context. Do you struggle more with, on average, getting started with work, or do you suffer more from stopping? Or in other words, do you struggle more with excessive arousal or insufficient arousal when it comes to this? That can help you figure out sort of, let's say, what is your weakness, and structure your schedule and your sort of days around that. Moving forward, what happens when we actually leave this window of tolerance, when we leave this dysregulated state? Well, again, a lot of bad things. So lack of presence or sensitivity to the states of others, misattribution of our own emotional states to the actions of others, ineffective emotional regulation, not good decision making, excessive negative thoughts and emotions, and it goes on and on and on. So I think ideally we want to avoid as much as possible, interacting with others and working in a dysregulated state. And so then the question becomes, how can we properly regulate ourselves? Well, one key is getting enough active recovery. All that stuff that I talked about earlier, all those 3 slides give you plenty of ideas how to do that. You can adapt that to sort of your life. But even moving beyond that, what we need to do is, again, acknowledge the realities of our physiology and our psychology. So again, focus on that functional compartmentalization, the divergent and the creative thinking, one or the other, not mixing them. Working in cycles, as we've already discussed. recovering actively, as we've discussed as well. And then the last piece that we're going to talk about here is understanding and caring for our basic needs. So I see a lot of people talking about work-life balance. I'm not sure that's a good way to talk about it or to think about it. I think work is something that is integrated with the realities of our life. Because what happens in one inevitably affects the other. If you have, if there's something going on, if your partner is sick, for instance, you go to work or your children are sick, it's really hard to believe that that's not going to affect you. That's going to inherently put a certain level of stress on you, and that's just a reality that we have to figure out how to deal with. It's not suddenly that we have a stressful day at work and then we drive home and then we put on the perfect smile and we're in a perfect place to socialize. That's just not the way that it works, as I think most of us have probably experienced. And so then a lot of long run stress management, if we're assuming we're doing that active recovery, assuming that we're working to the realities that we've discussed, comes down to caring for our basic needs. And so, of course, we've probably all seen this pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy. The idea being, if we take care of our physiological needs, we suddenly, have to take care of our safety needs. Then we can think about love and belonging. If we're lucky enough to have that, we can, think about self-esteem. And if we're super lucky there, then we can move on towards self-actualization. But the funny thing is, this is wrong. This was actually not created by Maslow. This was, I think it was a management consultant that sort of leveraged his ideas into this, and it sort of mischaracterizes Maslow's ideas. So there's another guy, Scott Barry Kaufman, who wrote a very good book called Transcend, and he sort of depicts this in a little bit more, in a way that more accurately represents Maslow's theories and what he was trying to teach us here. The idea being that we have a basic set of needs: security needs, deficit needs, these being self-esteem, connection, and safety. And then these needs are connected to our growth needs, which are more, in the self-actualization space. So exploration, love, purpose, a lot of the space that we all want to act in as much as possible. And refining this down, at the end of the day, our brains are prediction machines. And when our environment is not predictable enough, we enter a state of physiological entropy where our energy is not directed towards these things we'd love to do, like explore new cities or, find our purpose in life and work towards that purpose, but rather that our body and our psychology directs that energy towards survival. And the sort of, with this metaphor, if there's holes in the hull of a ship, no matter how much the wind is blowing. And the point is, proper care for our basic needs unlocks performance, because high performance is an emergent phenomenon of taking care of those things. When we're able to work with these, acknowledge these physiological and psychological realities, to care for ourselves, psychological entropy goes down. That allows our body to direct energy towards those higher pursuits of self-actualization, love, exploration, et cetera, et cetera. And so just sort of some basic stuff here. A lot of this falls in the realm of psychology, but it's good to keep it in mind. It might be something to work on in your specific context with a therapist, depending on your context. But so safety, a lot of the basic questions are you eating and sleeping well? Of course, we all know the phenomenon of hangry, right? That's the place of high entropy where we're really not able to act in those more connecting creative spaces. Do you have a stable and predictable life at home? This can be something that's we have to more carefully maintain if we're traveling a lot or if we have a nomadic lifestyle. Are you dealing effectively with past trauma? Well, that's something for sort of your own reflections and the therapist, but it's something that if dealt with effectively can actually unlock a lot more energy for our growth as well. And then connection, right? Do we have friends? Do we interact with them deeply? Do we feel a sense of connection to them? Intimacy, do we feel secure attachments to loved ones? This is not just to our parents and to our partners, but also an emotional intimacy with the people around us. Do we feel that they're being genuine with us and that we're being genuine with them, that we understand each other, that we're actually striving to understand each other and help each other grow? And then on the last level there's other things that are more in the realm of psychology therapist work, which is, what is your sense of self-worth? How do you like and respect yourself? And do you feel you're valuable to others? Do you feel that you're effective in accomplishing your goals and perform and deal well with challenges in your life? If you want to dig into this, I highly recommend the book. It actually, I use it a lot in a lot of my sort of coaching practices and in my course as well. The last principle before we get into some specific recommendations for nomadic lifestyles, I'll go through pretty quickly. which is to keep an eye on burnout triggers. A lot of people talk about burnout. It's a pretty misunderstood topic when the science is quite clear on why we get burnt out. And there's a number of main triggers. So lack of control, a conflict in values. You're working at a place where people are acting in a way that doesn't align with your values, insufficient reward. Maybe you're not getting paid enough, or you're taken for granted. Your accomplishments aren't acknowledged, even if it's not in a way that affects your compensation. You literally have a work overload, right? That's an obvious reason for burnout. Or you feel that there's unfairness or nepotism at your work, or with the people you collaborate with, or a breakdown of community. And so I'm not going to dig really deep into these things here. I'm trying to leave a bit more time for the discussion so we can help you adapt this to your actual context and ask questions. But these are things to keep in mind. And again, if we're maintaining ourselves with the first 5 principles, really acknowledging that reality, and we keep an eye on this, it's really hard to burn ourselves out. Ask me, because I've done it a few times because I wasn't keeping an eye on this. Moving forward, again, this is going to be fairly dense in the text, but what I kind of wanted to do is make some conclusions for people who are living or aspiring to live this nomadic lifestyle, to adapt those specific things to their context. Again, the first thing is that nomadic lifestyles tend to facilitate divergent thinking, and they tend to make convergent thinking hard, right? We're exploring a lot of different things. We see a lot of different novelty that gives us a lot of ideas. But at the end of the day, if we want to do something with those ideas, we still need to figure out how we can execute. And that, in my experience, tends to be a bit of the harder thing to do when you have a more nomadic lifestyle and when you're traveling a lot. And powerful intention is required, right? Because, of course, if we struggle with all this novelty around, why would we sit down and do work? So I think being rigorous with ourselves and setting powerful intentions around why we're doing what we're doing is really, really important. Being clear with our objectives. Of course, sleep is another thing. We all want to buy cheap plane tickets. I think I do too. But we should definitely weigh, the dollars saved here or there with the damage done to our sleep, and how that's going to affect our energy, our motivation, our wellness, our creativity in the days going forward. And this is something that I'm actually a lot more conscious of now. And sometimes just the inherent chaos of travel can impede your ability to do that convergent thinking and to actually execute. And sometimes what I do there is just embrace that, right? If I know I'm going to have some volatile days going forward, I try to do a lot of execution beforehand, and then set up that time to more sketch out ideas, to reflect on what I've been doing. And I actually tend to be very, very, very creative in the plane with no distractions. So we can kind of take that disadvantage and turn it into an advantage. I think the other thing too, build the components of your day. So be very intentional about how you schedule your day. What I actually do is all of my events in my calendar are scheduled, repeating forever and ever and ever. Every Friday, I adjust it. If I change time zones, I just drag those things around. Super easy to try and keep adhering to your intentions there. You don't have to think about it, right? It's like, oh, I'm lazy to do X, Y, or Z. Well, it's in the calendar. There's a right way there's a formula there to do it. I have to exercise now, or whatever it might be. It's those things are really, really important to structure your day and direct your energy accordingly. And of course, the way you structure this depends on what your objective is. So figure out what those objectives are and optimize around it. Maybe you really are out there traveling because and pursuing a nomadic lifestyle because you want to explore more, you want to figure out new creative projects, new creative endeavors, right? And so you can fully double down on that, for example. And so the other thing here is align all of the activities that you're doing within a given day or a given period, either with reflection or execution according to your specific intentions and objectives. So as one example, if you have a divergent day, if you're out there and you fully want to leverage that divergent thinking, so this would be a day when you're going to new restaurants, you're meeting new people, you're taking those city and museum tours, you're exercising, maybe walking and surfing without objectives, and maybe even some ideas bubble up and you're recording them. If it's much more of a convergent day, well, this might be something that's more boring, right? So you need to have a more strong routine, maybe eat at that same convenient, healthy place that you already know, rather than using your energy to find something new to do on that particular day. Structure your focus blocks, ideally make sure you have a place to sit down. Same place also makes it a lot easier for us to get into that flow, into that focus. and then make sure to alternate with active recovery. Not all of this is rocket science. I'm sorry. A lot of the complexity is in actually doing the thing, and applying the thing to your context. So I think I'll take about 2 more minutes here before we move to questions. Another thing you can do is build default protocols where you struggle, right? It's easy to say, well, I'm not going to exercise because I don't know what to do. I have 3 different protocols. And if I don't find a gym that I'm going to go to, I'm just picking one of those, rotating through those protocols. So I can't give myself the excuse. The same applies to social connection, right? If you're losing a bit of the contact, let's say with, friends and family, schedule certain days and times with them, build it into your schedule. Think about how to make that transition towards sleep as well. And as I've kind of mentioned before, structure your weaknesses. If you tend to be able to think much more divergently easily, then probably you're going to have to structure much more rigidly and adhere to that focus time. And if you're much better at that convergent thinking, well, then probably like me, you're going to have to make sure to put the emphasis on rest. And at the end of the day, this is a lot of theory. Don't try and make a perfect theory if you're going to try and take some steps forward based on these principles here. Build something that you can adhere to at the beginning, see how it works, iterate it, and eventually you'll get to something that works really well for you. I've been iterating mine for several years now. It gets better and better, but the same building blocks are always there. And before, we get into the last, discussion and questions, I want to sort of say a few last words. So the principles that are outlined here are objective, right? They're based on science, but their application to your life is subjective. And we should never, of course, swallow another's subjective truths whole, getting a bit into the philosophical. This is a lot of information, again, and the road to applying them in your context is iterative and it takes time. And the realities of effective knowledge work, or what I would call human work, actually fly in the face of a world that, from my point of view, is very stuck with old mental models inherited from the Industrial Revolution, where what we just needed were workers to run machines in 8-hour shifts. That's not the way knowledge work works. That's not the way creativity works. And increasingly, in my view, as AI takes a lot of the execution away from us, we should double down on the human so we can have that maximum creativity and wellness and really, maximize our humanity. Again, we are not machines and we shouldn't treat ourselves as such, in my opinion. We're biological systems and we must act according to the reality of our physiology and psychology. So be kind to yourself as you grow and look for deep meaning out there to power you through life is kind of my closing words. And now I will open the floor for some discussion and takeaways. I hope I didn't go too fast, but please, refer back to the slides and the recording going forward if you found this helpful.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful, and there was a lot of good information there. And I'm sure that I'll be going back and checking out those lists of active recovery, because that is also an area where I need a little help. I felt a little personally attacked by the no phone. Because I so often find myself taking my break away from my desk and I end up on email on my phone and no idea how that happened. But we do have some questions. We have time for questions. And so we already have some in the chat in Q&A. We'll get started with those. While we're doing that, everyone, please feel free to add any additional questions into the Q&A or chat box. We'll get started on questions, but as you think of anything, put it in there and we'll try to get to everything. So one of the first questions I wanted to start with is what digital tools do you use to help manage tasks and subtasks?
That's a good question. I actually keep it very simple personally. I use the Apple Calendar app to sync my multiple calendars. And what I do every Friday and throughout the week, I'm accumulating a list of tasks that don't have a higher level of importance, right? So when I'm sitting behind my computer, I actually have a pen and paper by the side of my desk. And as I think about something that sounds awesome and fun to do, instead of letting myself be distracted, I write it down there unless it's super urgent. Every Friday, I look through that list, I think about the week, and then I actually put the tasks into my flow blocks that I pre-scheduled for the next week. It takes a little while because at some points you're overestimating the things that you think you can do and underestimating, but eventually get that pretty dialed in. And that's the way that I do it. I also make use of the Notes app pretty heavily on Apple because a lot of what I think we need to do is just dump this data and keep going on what we've already preset as our priorities, and then later take those divergent thinking moments to reflect, and then actually be sure, okay, am I really wanting to switch to this other task because it's more sexy to do, or is it really more important, right? So put that in your more like reflection periods, if that answers the question. I'm probably going to try this AI assistant called Motion, but I don't know yet. That's what I might move towards.
I use a Pomodoro timer, which is
Yeah.
so maybe some folks would like to check into that. It's really just a fancy name for setting a timer for your work block and taking a break
Yeah.
at the end. So there's definitely some online tools for the Pomodoro technique that you could look up, or you can just use a good old-fashioned timer on your phone or watch, or even a physical timer, but that is not digital. That is helpful. Another question that came up, I'm not sure if this one came up before or after you put your sample weekly schedule up, but there's two questions that I think kind of can go into this. So the first question was, where does your week start and where does your week end? And the second question that I think connects with that well, as it relates to sort of like maybe weekends or personal tasks, where would cleaning and organization or maybe home care type of things fall in to this, divergent or convergent?
Okay, so the first question, I think I like my work, so I work a lot. I usually work Mondays through Saturdays. At least the first part of the day on Saturday I work, and then the afternoon and Saturday I take fully off. But I also work during the week only from 5 a.m. until about 2. So after that, I'm out there exercising at the sauna. The other thing I do is sometimes I do work from home, and I've found, vacuuming or doing some small tasks in those 5 to 20 minute slots can work really well, because sometimes you just want to switch it up, right? You just want to take the load off. And so I actually kind of like vacuuming. So that's often something that I find myself doing, right? And I also I didn't put that in the calendar, but I have certain days a week that I try to make sure that I have dinner scheduled with friends, right? And other tasks I have, like my Sunday afternoons when I do a lot of my food prep for the week going forward. And so I have those other personal things in there too. I've just didn't want to overcomplicate it with 1,000 other things in there. But I think, as oftentimes, forget about the 1,000 things I put on the list of active recovery. Switching up what you're doing in a fundamental way, right? So if you're getting up from your laptop and you're moving around a little bit and vacuuming or cleaning a bit or whatever, or something like this, so let's say, putting the clothes in the dryer or folding them for 10 or 15 minutes, you are getting active recovery in a sense, in something that might be similar to a walk, right? But pay attention to how you feel that load of stress. If you feel when you do those things your stress increasing, maybe that's not going to work for you. If you feel like me, that a lot of that takes it off, well, just be really sensitive and try and develop that sense of introspection and self-awareness.
Okay, interesting. So cleaning really could fall into either category depending on how much of a mental load it's taking on you.
Well, if you're breaking your full block to do cleaning, then probably you're just distracting yourself because you don't want to do the task. But if you're taking that intentional 5 to 20 minute break or whatever it works out to being for you, that can work, right? But again, it's like why are we always distracted to emails? Because it's super addictive and we think we did something, when in fact most of the time we've just distracted ourselves from the most important thing. So sorry, it's a bit of a verbose answer to those questions, but hopefully that helps.
No, I think it does. We have another question about what happens if you have a bad night's sleep? How do you adjust your schedule the next day to still be productive?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a good one, right? We get sick, we get injured, we have a bad night's sleep. I try to, on average, run a number of focus blocks that I'm only running at about 80% capacity. So I have some built-in time there, and I allow myself to sometimes push some things forward. And right, if I'm getting sick, and that actually happened the other week, it actually just happened today. I only slept 4 or 5 hours last night. But what I literally did is I had some extra space on Friday. I dragged, an hour and a half focus block that had specific tasks defined in it. and I put it on Friday. I don't normally want to do that. That's when I want to reflect, when I want to recover, but I had to choose to do that. And because I already had it in my calendar, laid out what I wanted to do, it's literally as simple as dragging it forward, as long as you have that slack, right? Don't schedule your day 1,000%. You need those breaks and you need some slack time in there. And I even, when I schedule my week ahead, I like to leave a couple, 2 or 3 flow blocks at least, so that I can do just that thing. Sometimes I get sick, sometimes, don't sleep well, but sometimes things take longer, right? And so then you can just say, okay, well, it's okay. This took longer than I thought. I've got a couple of free blocks. I'm going to just assign that one ad hoc to this stuff that I wasn't able to get done, regardless of what the reason is.
Excellent. That is really helpful. I'm a big fan of time blocking as well. And when you have those in the calendar already, it makes it a lot easier to kind of mess things around if you need
simple.
to.
It sounds simple, but it's so powerful. I wish I would have discovered it sooner.
I agree. And it's also, I find it a really good way to I call it protecting my calendar too. So that I know that I have this time for a block of time that is especially for a task that needs to get done, which is really helpful. So that is a good tip to build in some time so that if you do have a bad night of sleep or if you're not feeling well, that there is a little bit of flexibility there. We also do have another question about can this apply to someone with a 9 to 5 or someone whose primary only job task is cold calling?
Somebody who's a 9 to 5. I mean, the teams that I manage, I literally teach this to them and encourage them to work this way. I also don't care if they start work at 5 a.m. like I do or at 10. It doesn't matter as long as they get stuff done. I think that partially depends on the culture. I think it's really hard to argue against these principles. I've seen the impact in my own life, and it is based on pretty rigorous science. So I think, yeah, it's just more of okay, understanding things like office hours, right? There is a certain volatility there. And I actually worked with one of the front desk people at my job recently, and we were able to apply the same system to her calendar. People would walk up to her all the time. She's like, "How can I do this? I need to be able to instantly react to all these people." I said, "Look, if you define office hours, people are going to come there if it's not urgent. And guess what? Most tasks are not urgent. And then you just tell them you need to call me, right? Or put in or literally call me if there's an emergency, or literally walk up to me. Don't put a message in the chat." So you put a bit of resistance to these people coming in contact with you. It's uncomfortable at first, but I've seen it actually open up a lot of energy for people. I've seen it for her in particular. She's actually able on average to react to people faster when she was able to do this uncomfortable thing. So I think a lot of what hinders us from doing this is old unconscious mental models and just the inherent discomfort in changing and asking things of other people. And if you tell them, "Look, I'm not doing this because I don't want to help you. It's because I'm trying to figure out how to serve you most effectively or to help you most effectively," that's another way to reframe it. If all of your days are cold calls, well, I mean, I think working in cycles still makes sense there, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're not at the top of your game when you're doing those cold calls, your conversion is going to go down. So I think figuring out how that looks and seeing if rest can keep you more consistently at the top of your game and increase your conversion, right? That might be one way to think about this. But I mean, I know one thing: doing calls for 8 hours straight, you're not going to be as effective. And especially when a lot of when a lot of this comes down to emotional regulation and our ability to make connections with people in cold calling, there might be something there that if you're more continuously regulated, that you can, and other sort of phenomena that can help you actually become more effective, right? You're not going to be effective if you're doing 8 hours of cold calling every day nonstop. It's just not going to happen, right? I mean, it doesn't work that way. I've done some cold calling myself as well, so I have some experience there. But hopefully that clears it up. And if not, please be sure to ask a follow-up question. Oh, I can't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry, they're doing a little bit of lawn care outside. I don't know if you can hear the machines in the background. I apologize if you can. Someone earlier in the chat was mentioning something about how if they could make their mundane tasks more automatic, then they would have more time to spend on including personal time, other things also personal time. So can you talk a little bit more about how you structure taking care of those kind of more like mundane tasks?
Yeah, that's actually kind of related to the front loading in my days, the execution, and in my weeks, the execution. I've just learned I mean, some people wake up with a ton of energy. Other people wake up and take a while to get started. There's nothing inherently bad in there. It's just different chronotypes. I literally wake up at like 4:30 and I just want to do stuff, right? And so I try to put my less compelling and more mundane tasks at these times of day and times of week when I know that I'm that I'm more likely to have that energy, to have that focus. Some other trick that I use sometimes is I will schedule those tasks right after I did a workout, because usually I feel pretty superhuman after a workout, and I just push that energy into 30, 60, 90 minutes of doing stupid stuff that we all have to do that we hate doing. um, and then sometimes too, it's a question of nervous system regulation that is the barrier from you getting started. So I sometimes do some of those errands that I just don't like to do after I've gone to the sauna, because that's something that really, really helps me get into a state of nervous system regulation. And I'm just like pretty much happy with most things, super regulated. And I'm just like, well, I got to do this. It's gonna make my life better. I got to, like, I don't know, send that check or pay that bill, or go to Walgreens and get whatever it might be. And so I kind of leverage those little tricks. And so I think, to boil it down, is understanding when you have that energy and focus to do those things. And then, making sure you're doing the right active recovery to help you regulate your nervous system, and just make it easier to get into that. Because that can be one of the biggest reasons why we avoid these tasks, is just, that we're not regulated.
I agree. And also, I like to block them all together, and so I can limit that context switching that you mentioned earlier as
Yes,
well.
yes. Exactly. Yeah. No, like trying to get those tasks done in your 5 to 20 minute break, that's also a disaster, right? In most cases.
Yeah, no, that I don't think that would work for for me. But are there any? We have a few more minutes. So if anyone has any last minute questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat or in the Q&A box. We have about 2 more minutes, and I do want to give Jacob a few moments to wrap it up. So last call for any questions. And of course, I will include Jacob's contact information in a message that I send out after this session in case you have further questions. So with that said, Jacob, I'll hand it over to you for a wrap up.
Cool. Well, I hope this was helpful. I tried to do a lot in a short period of time, which is both good and bad. But the good part of that is that you'll have the video, I hope, and then the PDF to go back towards it. This has really helped me, and I've helped a lot of people in companies with these similar principles. And sort of building on that, I do a course that goes a lot deeper in these sorts of things. It's a pretty intense 6-month voyage. You do it in 6 to 8 groups of 6 to 8, where I help people really find deep meaning, purpose, and sort of align that with wellness and performance. I also do one-on-one coaching. So this focuses more on leadership strategy, mostly in clean tech, for clean tech companies, and individual and organizational performance. And I have a weekly newsletter that is just sort of like breaking out different psychological principles, scientific principles, in 5 or 6 sentences, and then giving you some reflection questions to figure out how to adapt it to your context. So if you want to try some of this stuff out, I can offer you a free coaching call. There's a link here, or you can email me. And if you decide that the course might be interesting, if you mention that you attended this presentation, then I'll give you a $200 discount, as I've mentioned here. Check out the website. Feel free to reach out to me, even if it's not on these subjects. I love talking about these things. I love helping people around these sorts of things, because I mean, I've burnt myself out too many times. And then all of a sudden I realize when I don't do that, I actually get even more done. So I want to help other people sort of live well, live happily, and also be productive, because I don't think those things are incompatible. And thanks again for all of your time.
Jacob, we do have one more question, and I actually think it's a great question
Sure.
to wrap on. Advice on how
Cool.
to take a break during a deep work or flow. Like, how do you rip yourself away if you're really in it and you're chugging along?
Well, so actually, I have a pretty good example on this because I'm kind of a flow junkie. So I kiteboard, which is epic flow. And what I normally do is I will only go out for 60 to 90-minute sessions as well, just to leverage these same principles. Because what I've noticed is if I go out for much longer, and sometimes I've been out there for 3 hours straight, that I come back. And the other day I did that. I was out there for 3 hours. I came back. I had my nephew's birthday party with my cousins and my family, and I was just dead, right? I was just completely dead. I burned it way too hard. And frankly, if I would have just broken that 3 hours up into two sessions, I would have gotten everything I wanted out of it, right? But still been able to participate in those other domains of my life. I think it's really hard. And again, there, when I'm out kiteboarding, I do the same thing. I always, with my Apple Watch, I put timers on. And then that just sort of, I try and use that to snap me out of it. And I just try and remind myself, yes, flow is amazing. Flow is beautiful. But the hard part about flow is if we burn it too hard, it's harder to get into that state in the future. And that's another reason why we really need to break these things up, as addictive and as beautiful as it is. Because I was out there the other day and I was just like jumping, nailing it. And right at that peak is when I had to stop to be able to take some rest, to be able to do that again. And so I hope that helps. I hope that helps. Yes.
It's an endless journey that we're on, I think, with these types
Yeah.
of things. So
It's
little by little.
Yeah, iteration, self-awareness, thinking about this, not making it too complicated, and not focusing too much on theory, actually trying some stuff out and seeing how it works.
Awesome. Well, I think that is our time for today. So I
Cool.
wanted to thank everyone who was able to attend. Again, if you missed it at the beginning, I'm Lindsay. I'm head of community and events at Outsite. We offer co-living spaces, community and events just like this for digital nomads, creatives, remote workers, or anyone who's interested in that lifestyle. You can find us online at outsite.co. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me by replying to any of the emails that got sent out about this event. Also, big thank you to Jacob for taking the time to share a lot of this really great information with us, putting together a really great deck that you'll be able to reference later. And yeah, so please feel free to reach out to either of us if you have any further questions. And I thank you all again for attending.
Thanks a lot. I forgot to mention that I'm at Outsite Lisbon and I love it and I can highly recommend it. So please give it a try if you haven't
Happy to
already.
hear that. Yeah, Outsite Lisbon is one of our biggest locations. It also has a really great nomad community within the Outsite folks, as well as the larger city is great for remote work and meeting people and exploring some new places. So definitely check out Outsite. We have about 50 locations in Europe, Latin America, Asia, and in Africa. Again, you can find us on the web at outsite.co. Appreciate everyone taking the time to hang out with us today. I hope you enjoyed the session, and check out the website if you wanted to come some more sessions. I'd love to have you. All right.
Bye-bye. Ciao.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks.